Sam, thank you so much for being a customer and being with me here today on the Captain's Vlog. What I like to start by doing is just asking you for like a potted history of your career, what you do, and your sort of roles and responsibilities, just to let the folks know.
Yeah, happy to help. So in my current role, I am Director of Digital Solutions and Technology at Bruntwood. I've not always been in that role. I started off as a data entry bod 22 years ago. In my time, I've been an accountant, a BI developer, a software developer, a solutions architect, a whole manner of different roles, but increasingly techie. For the last 7 years, I've been responsible for all things software, systems, technology at Bruntwood. Bruntwood are a commercial property company, around 45 years old. They own buildings across Leeds, Liverpool, Manchester, Birmingham, and they aim to create thriving cities. And they do that by having vibrant places to work, with about 3,000 customers using their offices for a whole variety of different business lines.
You've said that before, haven't you?
No, that was I've said similar things before, but this is wing it.
I think really you've been there for a long time, haven't you? I mean, how long have you been at Bruntwood for?
It's 22 years I've been there.
That's a stretch and a half.
More than half my life, and it's been the only job I've ever really had.
That's interesting. So how have you seen? So the way Bruntwood has evolved has probably sort of in some shape or form reflected the way people perceive work, and like, all this of work from home recently, but
Yeah.
You've seen that across 20 odd years. So.
Absolutely. Well, the commercial real estate sector has changed quite generally. It's gone from being very traditional, where you have 25-year leases, 20-year leases for large occupiers, to almost space as a service. So the ambition now is that customers can take any sort of space for any sort of length and add in additional services like voice and data, cleaning, facilities management, a whole raft of things, anything to do with how you occupy your office. Bruntwood has always been ahead of the curve compared to most other property companies in leading that shift towards being more agile, more customer focused, really trying to keep ahead from what everyone else does. So it's been a monumental change. It's been sped up in the last 5 years by the impact of companies like WeWork, who had quite a disruptive model where they brought in co-working. Yeah. So the sector's had to adapt to that way of working, but also then, most importantly, the pandemic, which we initially thought was going to be almost a sector-changing, sector-finishing impact. So will people still need office space once we've established that everyone can work from home effectively? The answer is fairly conclusively, yes, they will still need office space. And I think Manchester in particular has had one of the most vibrant years for office lettings ever, which is partly down to people resizing, right-sizing, or looking for space. But a lot of it is that people now realise the value in having offices as a creative place to get their employees to come together, collaborate, and be inspired.
Yeah. I mean, I want to touch on that in a second, but going back to the WeWork thing, I've always described Bruntwood to other prospects and customers as the WeWork of the UK, with the big difference being that you construct and own the properties as well. Is that a really unfair comparison?
Yes, in many ways. So Bruntwood is family owned, and while there is investment from other parties into it now, it is still at heart a family company, and its ethos is still very much around making cities better. So it's a contributor to the arts. It's very engaged with local activity in cities. Everyone's given time to go and work for charities. So I work for a housing association on Bruntwood's time. And it's very different to WeWork, which is a commercial enterprise, to generate money and profit, not necessarily try and make places better. So there's a very different aims and ambitions for the two companies. Where they overlap is on the innovation and trying to be at the leading edge, but they have very different reasons for doing it. Bruntwood's is to try and create thriving cities. WeWork's is to try and create money for the shareholders. Yeah, so perhaps an unfair comparison slightly, but not materially.
Yeah, sorry about that. But I definitely stand corrected, and I'll make sure that I make a point of.
Yeah, I think you're right in that both companies are trying to be leading edge innovators in how space is used. So in
Yeah,
that sense, yeah, it's a fair comparison.
yeah. I spent quite a bit of time with the then uh, global VP of marketing for WeWork, and he was sort of sitting there telling me like, we've got all these plans to completely change the face of how people work, and there's a lot of there was a lot of talk about it, but in honesty, I've not seen that much change being implemented. So,
No, what they have changed is they've changed expectations of space consumers now
yeah,
towards the flexible. They haven't radically changed the fact that people work in offices. WeWork's model tends to be that you've got a almost a template that you can stamp in cities as you move around and repeat it. So you take the same basic model and do it everywhere. Whereas Bruntwood's is much more nuanced than that. So it's around connectedness to the space that we operate in. So you'll find that we have individualized buildings based on where they're located in city centres. There'll be buildings designed around a particular client base in mind, trying to generate communities of customers. So that hyper-localisation that Brum would have of buildings to places is very different to the boilerplate, which is trying to be used elsewhere.
I was reading the stuff with the was it Legal in General, the joint venture around creating these science parks,
Yeah.
and they're very bespoke things, aren't they? You go into a whole lot of thought and kind of design around how these spaces are going to be occupied and used and leveraged and so on. And it's a far cry from just having an SPV, a special purpose vehicle, to sort of acquire a bunch of floors in a building somewhere and just renting out sort of desks. So yeah, I definitely see there's a massive gulf between the way Bruntwood does things
Yeah.
and the other guys. I mean, it's talking about like the future of work and that sort of thing. I know this has been done to death, especially post-pandemic, but I definitely see that that there is, from my point of view in particular. So we're a tech company. We have people scattered around the whole country, literally the whole world, in fact. And the last thing we want is to have this sort of like monolithic office location pinned to a certain location. We want the flexibility, being able to drop in and out of wherever we happen to be at that point in time. And that might be customer driven, it might be employee driven. And that, to me, that's the sort of like one of the uniques that Bruntwood brings versus other ways of getting office accommodation.
Absolutely. To be big enough that you have presence in many locations, but not so big that you're impersonal. That's the sweet spot that Bruntwood are occupying. The ability to spin up an office as and when you need it is fantastic. So, Bruntwood have customers who are based in Manchester, but might be visiting clients in Liverpool, for instance, and want use of office space for a day or access to somewhere they can work from a day in between meetings. And that's provided as part of the relationship. So that flexibility is a real key thing, and it doesn't anymore need to be an extension of a long-term lease. I think that's where the market's moving to. So previously, if you've been a customer in a large property somewhere, not just Bruntwood, but any of the UK property companies, and they own space elsewhere in the UK, you'd be able to negotiate a reasonable price for using that space.
Yeah.
Whereas I think what will shift and will carry on shifting is that the requirement to be a customer somewhere already won't be there for that occasional space. Yeah. You could be anyone that wants to use space for a day, no matter where you've come from or what your long-term ambitions are.
Yeah. I have a small confession to make, and please don't hold it against me. When we first got the inquiry from Bruntwood, I knew Bruntwood then, because you can't miss Bruntwood because being a northern boy, you see the signs everywhere. And in my mind, I sort of associated Bruntwood with construction. So these are the guys that just end up occupying and owning all these big commercial facilities around the northwest of the UK. And so I thought, why are they calling us? These are construction guys. Like construction guys, they don't do innovation. And I couldn't have been wronger in my sort of like presumption about that. So it'd be interesting to sort of get your take on like innovation in that space, and how that led on to you reaching out to us and looking at RocketPhone and that sort of thing.
Absolutely. It's worth a sort of a quick rewind on how we found ourselves first engaging with RocketPhone. Not when we spoke to you, but this is the preamble to how we first came across you. We had a old legacy accounting platform we used, which was an on-premise system, which was very much manual entry or ingesting large text files. And it was designed for the old-fashioned property that we spoke about earlier, when you've got a customer on a long-term lease and you'll engage with them once a quarter when you send an invoice to them. And it wasn't aimed necessarily at that flexible, fluid, really cutting-edge side of commercial property. So we had that accounting system, and we had a instance of Salesforce that we implemented back in 2015, 2016, when we'd really given the then sales team, the then asset management team, the legal team, full access to scope all their individual parts of the system. And they all built something that was really quite complicated, which is what they wanted. If it was possible to do it on the system, they wanted to do it. And we had probably a disconnect between how well used that Salesforce system was, and then someone manually keying that information from Salesforce onto our accounting system. And then we had a legacy reporting platform built on top of it. So there was lots of overhead to keep the whole thing afloat. And we had a lot of information going missing because people just didn't use the systems because they were clunky and awkward. So we had a large program, like an 18-month program, to re-platform all of our core systems. So I led that program, and it was looking at everything from lead generation, marketing, the sales process, the property onboarding, the legal process, and the accounting and finance package, and then the reporting suite altogether. And it took us 18 months. It was a huge investment in software at the time, and we created a really wonderful platform. And it was designed with sort of data literacy in mind. So the platform was designed to ingest just the least amount of data that was possible to actually run the business effectively. And then because it was such a lean system, the adoption was great. We managed to get people using it and pushing it and using it. And then because they were using it well and accurately, the reports that we got with it were brilliant. They were accurate, useful reports, but missing information because we had such a lean data set. So we're in this place where we had a well-adopted system generating accurate data and people asking for more data. So we layered up, and we kept on layering up what we were capturing during the sales process and the onboarding process. And so we had a really rich view of customers. What we were completely missing, though, from that customer view was any insight, knowledge about what was happening when they spoke to us, particularly on the phone. So your email content in your sales activity is well recorded. But if you're a commercial property company, you'll have customers who spend 20 weeks becoming a customer and might stay with you for 10, 20 years. And so we were missing a huge swathe of information about how those customers interact with us, what sort of things they phone us about, but also the people in the sales pipeline. And so when we were sent like an info sheet about RocketPhone, about what you guys were doing, we thought, well, that's a great thing to explore. We really want to speak to people who share our sort of view of that customer intelligence, that ability to understand everything about a customer and to systemize it, automate it, and be leading edge technology. Hence the first contact we made with you to say, I think we can work together.
I'm very grateful you reached out to us as well. It's actually, honestly, it's. I said this to another one of our customers. When you're in our shoes, you go out of your way to try and do things differently and come up with new ideas and like I'm not a recent follower of Steve Jobs' approach to sort of innovation. I've been following him for most of my life, and it's all about putting the user first, putting the customer first, and building those systems around them. And sometimes when you develop like completely new stuff, it's quite hard to explain to some customers because they've not seen it before. Like, A, what does it do? And then B, how can we apply it into your business? And one of the great things about Bruntwood has always been that you've always had this sort of openness and willingness to sort of try things and to trial. And you became a customer of ours fairly early on, actually, in our life as a business. So we had to, like every software company in its earlier years goes through a whole bunch of teething problems. And actually, you had a whole lot of patience for us which is really appreciated.
I was going to say that that's fresh off the back of being the tech person trying to get a property company to adopt and use tech, and just being aware of how all those small details can be tricky, and that a small change conceptually might be, from sort of back end development point of view, really quite major. So it comes from having the innovation and adoption led by someone who has felt that pain themselves recently, and knows the number of ways it can go awry.
Yeah. So I mean, our platform is 200% more robust than it ever was. Thanks to your help, and also like all the input that we got from your team was just really useful in helping us to sort of hone the solution for the next batch of customers. So. From our perspective, the engagement is fantastic, actually.
Well, our ethos has always been that we want to effectively modularize our own systems. So really, we're talking about a microservices architecture applied on a monolithic platform. So we wanted so that every component we had could be broken out, replaced, could interact with other components. So when we were talking to you about how we were going to implement RocketPhone and how we wanted it to interact with other things, we were always very aware that it had to be a piece in a jigsaw. So we've probably not asked you to overextend what the core functionalities of the platform are. We've probably never asked you to take on responsibility for things that shouldn't be in the platform. And it's always been about, will that be scalable, interoperable for us going forward, which is probably, as a developing software platform, what you need to build it anyway. So it happened that for us, our approach to using RocketPhone in our systems tied very nicely into product development for you to be able to reach out to other customers and do the same thing.
Absolutely.
So I think we aligned on technique of developing a platform.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, that scalability point is really important as well, because it's not just scaling to multiple customers; it's also scaling within the organisation. Because if we look at Bruntwood, I mean, how many employees? About 700 or is it?
Bruntwood's got a few entities, so if you count all the sort of group companies, it's around about 1,000. But around really, 1,000. Some of those are involved in the sort of Unify arm of the company, which does cleaning services that we sell to clients and so on. If you're looking at the actual office and building users that we have who are Bruntwood branded delivery, it's about 750.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. So we're kind of sort of in that. I mean, we're looking forward to sort of extending RocketPhone out to everybody. That's our objective. You may have just discovered this, but we absolutely plan to get RocketPhone in front of every employee inside Bruntwood. I mean, in terms of the impact that you think we could have on your business, do you think it goes beyond where we currently are? Do you think there are opportunities outside of like the current contact center and so on?
Yeah, absolutely. So what, in my eyes, RocketPhone primarily is a way of integrating and syncing that voice information that we've got into our CRM for context with customers, potential customers, about what they're doing. So if you imagine we have a view of a customer currently, we've probably got an awareness of how the sales process went with them, how the onboarding process goes. We'll have written communication about serious things. So say they've raised complaints, which obviously happens once in a million years at Bruntwood because no one ever complains. But if they were to raise a complaint, we would have a written record of it. What we don't get is we don't get to hear the phone calls or to understand the content of those phone calls where they might be expressing not complaints but dissatisfaction. We don't understand when they are speaking to us and we've got upsell opportunities that we might take advantage of, we might not take advantage of. So we've got the bare basics that we need for customers. So we've got the actual skeleton of what the relationship is with the customers, but we miss all the nuance, all the shade, and all that information that if we could get hold of it would make us much richer in terms of how we can speak to our customers and understand what they're really doing. So any aspect of Bruntwood that has a customer connection, which is supposed to be every single function in the business should be customer oriented and customer minded, potentially has a benefit from RocketPhone for making it so that we actually understand what that interaction is. It goes well beyond just a straightforward telephony. We've spoken in the past about, can it work with mobile phones? Can we use soft phones more? Can can we make better use of the transcription features? So yeah, there's a whole raft of areas where we want to roll out and integrate more closely with you.
Perfect. That's really, really, really good to hear. Final question, I guess. Any advice that you would offer to other companies considering either RocketPhone or some of the similar kind of system?
Yeah. So my advice would be, first of all, to make sure that you are very clear on what it is you want to do. You need to not treat RocketPhone as a straightforward VoIP platform. You're not replacing like for like on telephony. What you're buying is the opportunity to extend your business processes. You're buying yourself access to data that you don't currently have. So when you're engaging with RocketPhone, that needs to be what you have at the front of your mind, is how can we improve, refine our customer processes, or client process, whatever it might be, it's not for your customers, but how can we actually get much better at understanding what's happening on our phone calls, and how can we integrate that into our core systems.
Perfect. That's great. So thank you so much, Sam, for joining me on this vlog. Very kind of
a
you
pleasure, much as always.
And and thank you so much for being a customer. Really appreciate that.